14, it's Daniel 8 and verse 14 sets a time for the Laodicean church to begin its movement. Please remember that the Seventh-day Adventist church didn't begin as a denomination. The Seventh-day Adventist church began as a movement. And when it became a denomination, it began to fulfill the prophecy of Revelation 3, the need of nothing church, the indifferent church, the church that's neither hot nor cold, the church with the triple affliction. But Daniel 8 and verse 14, it helps us to understand these 5 parts. Part 1, it sets a time for the Laodicean church and its movement. And you must understand, I can't but emphasize, put it in your mind, because the enemy already told you something contrary, that present truth is a biblical doctrine. It is a biblical principle. Wherefore, I will not be negligent to put you always in remembrance of these things, though ye know them, and be established in present truth. There is a specific work and a message for these times. Present truth demands that we know what Jesus is doing right now. You cannot know what he's doing unless you understand Daniel 8 and verse 14. So this principle, this biblical doctrine of present truth is now also supported and given points of clarity in early writings, page 63. But don't forget, it begins with 2 Peter 1 and verse 12. It is a biblical doctrine. So don't say it's something that belongs to the Seventh-day Adventist church. Don't say that it's something that's taught by in Ellen White's writing. It is taught by the word of God, present truth. There are many precious truths contained in the word of God, but it is present truth that the flock needs now. I have seen the danger of the messengers running off from the important points of present truth to dwell upon subjects that are not calculated to unite the flock and sanctify the soul. So in these writings, we're given 4 categories of messages that we should be dealing with, presenting, understanding in these last days. And we were also given 4 references or impacts of these 4 categories. And it says this, but subjects as such as the sanctuary, subjects such as the 2300-day prophecy, subjects such as the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Please listen to this part carefully. This is why the 2300-day prophecy, also with the other 3, sanctuary, commandments of God, faith of Jesus. This is why the 2300-day prophecy, these are perfectly calculated to what? Number 1, or A, I should say, explain the past events. B, to show what our present position is. Why is the 2300-day prophecy so important? A, to explain the past events. B, to show what our present position is. C, to establish the faith of the doubting. Do you have any question? Are you sitting in any query? Is there any element or condition of darkness upon your study? Are you not clear as to where we are? Well, A, if you study the 2300-day prophecy, it would explain the past Advent movement. B, it will show what our present position is. And C, it would establish the faith of any of you that is doubting. And then D, it will give certainty to the glorious future. The sanctuary cannot be studied without studying the 2300-day year prophecy, and vice versa. The 2300-day year prophecy cannot be studied without studying the sanctuary. So when the Millerites studied Daniel 8, they discovered a clearer understanding of the sanctuary and Christ's ministry. And then this became the doctrine that identified the Millerites, or it now is the doctrine that identifies the Seventh-day Adventist movement. All Christians are to teach the birth, the death, the resurrection, ascension, and second coming of Jesus. Every Christian has that responsibility, but not all Christians have the same identity. For example, a Protestant is a protester. If you are a Christian and you oppose the Catholic Church, then you are a Protestant. Anyone that opposes the Catholic Church is a Protestant. For you have the Baptist Church, and generally Baptists believe in baptism by immersion. The Baptist Church was a movement to protest against the Catholic teaching of sprinkling. So when Christianity needed clarity, God raised up a movement. The Catholic Church was teaching you need to be sprinkled to be saved, to be baptized, to be anointed. The Baptists came along and said, no, you need to be submerged deeply underwater. The Methodists, Catholics taught that no one can understand the word of God without Catholic interpretation. And they took all the Bibles and they burned them. And then they rewrote the Bible in Latin, and no one understood Latin but the Catholic priests. And they say, if you want to understand the Bible, then you need to come to the Catholic Church and sit under the Father. The Methodists came along and say, if you pray and study, if you pray and fast, then God will give you enlightenment. So this Methodist church began as a movement to protest against the Catholic teaching and the Latin Vulgate. Then there was another Protestant church that started, because these Methodists and Baptists got together and they studied together and they discovered two things: the Sabbath, and they discovered the sanctuary. The Millerites were a movement that protested against all the Catholic teaching. But this Millerite movement had a specific ministry, and that was to teach that Jesus is not on the cross. In other words, where is he now? What is he doing now? He's our high priest. And also the Millerites that became the Seventh-day Adventists had the responsibility of the ministry of health. So let's look at part 2. Daniel 8 and verse 14 deals with also, yes, the 2300-day prophecy, but it's also an experience that's referred to as the Great Disappointment. October 22, 1844. If you don't have it written, write it down now. And every year, your church should review the Great Disappointment, the 2300-day prophecy. And mind you, if your church would do that, then you would prepare the children and the family to deal with Halloween. That's next week. So we should be acknowledging October 22, 1844. We should be studying and reviewing it. So part two, the Great Disappointment. The Millerites taught that the sanctuary of the earth, in other words, they considered the earth the sanctuary. The Millerites taught that the sanctuary of the earth was to be cleansed. Why? Because the sanctuary that was on the earth was destroyed in 70 AD. Remember the story, the destruction of the Jerusalem. So the Millerites taught that Jesus would come on October 22, 1844. Now, you know that had to be a level of arrogance, even in the face of scriptures that no man knoweth the day or the hour. But here comes this Millerite group, not Seventh-day Adventists yet, the Millerite group that stood and said that Jesus is coming to this earth October 22, 1844. Now, why did they say that? They said that because when they studied Daniel 8 and verse 14, they knew when it began and they knew when it ended. And they knew that when it ended, it was the investigative judgment that would begin. But they had the right date, but not all of them had the correct subject. So in Revelation chapter 10, when we look at Revelation chapter 10, and I saw another mighty angel come down from heaven. I want you to take time and just read the whole chapter. I'm gonna try to skim through it so just to save time. And I saw another angel, mighty angel, come down from heaven, clothed with a white cloud, and a rainbow was upon his head, and his face was as it were the sun, and his feet as the pillars of fire. And he had in his hand a little book that was open. And he set his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the earth. In other words, this message of the little book is going to go to all the world, on land and even across the sea. So, Revelation 10, setting his right foot on the sea and his left foot upon the earth, so that the part in which he is acting in the closing scenes of the great controversy with Satan. This is what also was depicted by that vision that John was given. Jesus gave John this vision of an angel with one foot on the earth and one foot in the sea. The controversy had waxed stronger and more determined from age to age, and will continue to do so. So Daniel shall stand in his lot at the end of days. What happens, as Ellen White makes clear in the 7th volume of the commentary, John sees the little book unsealed. And you must understand that Daniel is called the little book because it's the sealed book. And John is writing the book of Revelation, which reveals. Let's go a little further. And he had in his hand a little book open, and a voice which I heard from heaven spake unto me again and said, Go and take the little book which is open in the hand of the angel. And he went and he took the book. And he said unto me, Take it and eat it up, and it shall make thy belly bitter, but it shall be in thy mouth sweet as honey. And I took the little book out of the angel's hand and ate it up, and it was in my mouth sweet as honey. And as soon as I had eaten, my belly was bitten. Now, I want you to know that this is a vision that Jesus is giving John, so that John would understand the limitations of Daniel, because Daniel was a sealed book. And what John was writing on the Isle of Patmos under the severe degree of persecution from Rome, he was set off. First, they tried to kill him in a vat of boiling oil. They couldn't do that. And then they decided to put him in exile in the Isle of Patmos. And now Jesus is revealing to John, and John is writing this book called the Book of Revelation. And John is told about this vision with an angel with his foot on earth and the same angel with one foot in the sea. And this is now he has a book in his hand. And the sweet part of the book is that which comes from the mouth, that which is spoken. But it is bitter to the belly because there's a bitter experience. And so the unsealing of the little book was the message in relation to time. The books of Daniel and Revelation are one. One is a prophecy, the other one's a revelation. One is a book sealed, the other is a book open. You must understand that, and you must really begin to see that. So the last period of probation, the gospel dispensation, is the last period of probation that will ever be granted to men. Listen carefully. Those who live under this dispensation of test and try, and yet are not led to repent and obey, will perish with the disloyal. Why? Because there is no second try. So again, looking further into part 2, this great disappointment. Among the prophecies forming the foundation of the Advent awakening of 1830s, if you want to study history, there's nothing wrong with studying history, but you need to study Christian history. What happened in the 1830s? What happened in the 1830s in Christianity? Well, it was called the Great Awakening. They didn't want to call it the Great Advent Awakening, but they called it, all Christianity called it the Great Awakening. But it was named the Advent Awakening of the 1830s. And even the 1840s was the prophecy of Daniel 8 and 14. This was part of it. Ellen White says this. Listen to what she says. In common with the rest of the Christian world, Adventists then held that the earth, or some portion of the earth, was the sanctuary. They understood that the cleansing of the sanctuary was the purification of the earth by the fires of the last great day, and that this would take place at the second advent. Hence, the conclusion that Christ would return to the earth in 1844. Read a little further. She says this, I just highlighted it in red. This prophetic period came to its close on October 22, 1844. The disappointment to those who expected to meet their Lord on that day was great. Now I want you to take note of this great awakening. Now, some of us remember that there are 4 events that identify the last days, all right? For you know that it's 4 events. Joel chapter 2, verse 27, 28, write it down. Joel chapter 2, verse 27 and 28. And it tells about the 3 events. Matter of fact, 4. The earthquake, the sun is dark, and the moon turned to blood. Joel chapter 2, verse 27 and 28. Right next to that, I want you to write down Acts chapter 2, and I believe it's verses 14 to 17. And it tells you about the same 3 events. But in Acts chapter 2, it's called the last days. And Joel chapter 2 is not called the last days, same 4 events, but it's not called the last days. In Acts chapter 2, it's the same 4 events, and it's called the last days. But this is what I want to point out to you. Stay with me, help us. These first 3 events took place 1755, 1780, and 1780. Why? Because the Catholic Church was still ruling the earth until 1798. But the stars fell when? November 1833. And I couldn't understand, and I asked the Lord to help me to understand why are these 4 events acknowledging or depicting or showing a period that's called the last days when the 4 events are not close in time. From 1755 to 1780, that's just 15 years. 15 years, 25 years. But when you go from 1755 to 1833, that's a big gap. Or even 1780 to 1833, it's a big gap. But the reason why the stars fell in 1833 was because of the Great Awakening. Major figures of the Great Awakening, such as George Whitefield and Jonathan Edwards, and you have Gilbert Tennant and Jonathan Dickinson and Samuel Davy. You look at this. Take a moment. Just look at this diagram. I pray that you get a copy of it. I pray that you understand that this is critical for you to understand the history. Why? Because in the 1830s, which is separate, that's the 4th event, the stars fell in the 1830s. That's the 4th event in Joel chapter 2 and Acts chapter 2. These are events that identify the last days. And so the 4th event is 1833, the falling of the stars. And part of that was when William Miller began to study. But William Miller, the Millerites, led by a Baptist preacher named William Miller, studied Daniel 8 and 14 with a group of Methodists and other Baptists. These were not Seventh-day Adventists. No such thing ever existed. They had incorrectly concluded that Jesus' second coming was to be on October 22. This was called the Great Disappointment. Few continued to study and were determined to discover the meaning of the cleansing. They discovered that the 2300-day year prophecy ended in 1844, and that it was the sanctuary in heaven that would be cleansed. It was the Millerite movement that became Seventh-day Adventists, who now have the responsibility of telling the world, of telling the whole world, that Jesus has moved from the holy place to the most holy place, and is now the responsibility of the Seventh-day Adventist Church to teach it, the sanctuary and the Sabbath. So the Millerites, they came together and they created a group, and three primary groups came out. You see in the middle of 1844, there was a group say, oh, that's the right date, and you got the right doctrine. Wrong event. A second group was a part of that movement. They says the doctrine, 1844, was wrong, and the event was wrong. And they went back to their church. And then there was another group. They kept setting dates. And this group was now called or understood to be Jehovah's Witness. Yes, Jehovah's Witness came out of the Millerite movement, and you should know that. And so also to the far left, there was the First-day Adventist Church. And so out of the group that's 1844 to your left, second from your left, you'll find 1844. They said that's the right date. They say that's the right doctrine. Wrong event, meaning that Jesus is not coming to the earth. You got the right date, you got the right doctrine, but you don't have the right event. Jesus is not coming to the earth. Jesus is moving from the holy to the most holy place. And out of that group came Seventh-day Adventists and another group that accepted the Sabbath, but they rejected the sanctuary, and that was the Church of God. And out of the Church of God, you have the Church of God, Seventh-day Church of God, and then you also have the Worldwide Church of God. And out of the Worldwide Church of God, then you also have Kojic, all your evangelical preaching, long robe wearing, gospel, oh, so much gospel singing and shouting. And this was the Worldwide Church of God that produced the Church of Kojic, the Church of God in Christ. But going back to the Seventh-day Adventist Church on your left, the Millerites was taught the 7-day Sabbath by a woman called Rachel Oates. Yes, this is your month of women. Then you need to understand who Rachel Oates is. So Rachel Oates taught the Seventh-day Adventists about the Sabbath. A Seventh-day Baptist taught Seventh-day Adventists about the Sabbath. So Daniel 8 in verse 14, it has 5 parts of this presentation. Part 3, the 2300-day prophecy, is the longest prophecy in the Bible. I want to take a moment, and again, I want to emphasize this to you because I have not heard from any of you. So I'm going to emphasize this again. GoYeMinistries.life. The email is info@GoYeMinistries.life. If you're not sure of how to support this ministry, let me suggest this to you. Just go online, Amazon, and buy 10 books. You don't have to worry about anything else. Just go buy 10 books. And you know what? Send those books throughout your neighborhood to different people. Why? Because of chapter 3. Look at chapter 3, the last part of chapter 3. Structuring a home in defense of Darwin, evolution, or defenestration of Lucifer. That's the great controversy, war in heaven. So all you want to support this ministry, you don't have to wait on anybody else. You don't have to share your business with anyone else. You can do it privately in your own home, in your own business. Just go to Amazon.com, put in Dale Scatling, put in the name Neville on Meadows, order the book, get 10. Get 10 and pass them out and tell the people to read chapter 3. Tell them to read the last 5 pages. Tell them to read the last 3 pages, because you know what's there. You have an idea. If you want to support this ministry, you can go to the website. There are options there. The email, you can send me email directly, ceo@menunderdevelopment.org. And then I want you to also take note of this. There is an organization, there is a company that's been in existence, I think, I'm told, for multiple decades. It's a deluxe payment exchange. There are Seventh-day Adventist conferences in America that uses this service. It's called Deluxe Payment Exchange. And all you have to do is sign up, you send payments, and that's simple. It's that simple to sign up, and you can do it directly yourself. Deluxe Payment Exchange. If you're concerned with how much you lose, then you'll never know how much you give. So part 3, the 2300-day year prophecy is the longest prophecy in the Bible. And the first thing you want to ask yourself about this 2300-day prophecy, when does it begin? When does it end? So in Daniel 8 and Daniel 12 and Revelation 1, please, I want y'all to get this. It blew my mind how the Lord made this so clear to me. For at the time of the end shall be the vision. Daniel 8 and verse 17. He said, go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Daniel 12, verse 9. For the time is at hand. That's Revelation 1 and verse 3. It just blew my mind. Come on, saints of God, walk with me, walk with me. And if you are in a praying spirit, you're praying with me. You're praying with me. This train is called time. In the beginning, God created time. Why? Because time never existed. Why? Because God only coexists with eternity. Why? Because time has a beginning and time has an end. Why? Because eternity does not have a beginning and eternity does not have an end. So in order for man to pass the test, God had to give man probationary time. So in the beginning, God created time. This train is called time. Go that way, Daniel, all right, till the time of the end. And Revelation 1 verse 3 says the time is at hand. So this is a train called time. This is the beginning of time. This is a train called time. This is the end of time. This is a train called time. And all of that which is read is the time of the end. Pray with me. Pray with me. Help us. Help us. In the order of God, most wonderful and advanced truth will be proclaimed. The first and second angels' messages were to be proclaimed, but no other light was to be revealed before these messages had done their specific work. This is represented by the angel standing with one foot on the sea, proclaiming with the most solemn oath that the time should be no longer. This time, which the angel declares with a solemn oath, is not the end of this world's history, neither of probationary time. I told you God said probationary time. But of prophetic time. Read it again. This time, which the angel declares with a solemn oath, is not the end of this world's history, neither of probationary time, but of prophetic time. Read the next lines with me, which should precede the advent or the second coming of the Lord. That is, the people will not have another message upon definite time. Please read this slowly with me. This angel standing with one foot on the earth and one foot in the sea. John is given this vision. We are sharing, enjoying John's vision. That is, the people will not have another message upon definite time after this period of time, reaching from 1842 to 1844. There can be no definite tracing of prophetic time. The longest reckoning reaches to the autumn of 1844. This is why the 2300-day prophecy is so important, because it is the longest, and according to Spirit of Prophecy, it is the last prophecy you're going to get that deals with, get the language, make sure you get the language, that deals with prophetic time. Prophetic time. Going a little bit further. So, this is a train called time, right? Now, this is the time of the end. Why? Because it's the beginning of the end. Time will be no more. The end of the train is called time. This is the end of the train called time. And the end of this caboose is the end of time. 2300-day prophecy. When does it begin? Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem. Now I want to take a moment. I want to make sure you get this in your head, because this is very important. How do you know when to start counting 2300? How do you know when to start? Right there in Daniel 9, verse 25. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem. Why? Because Jerusalem was destroyed. And you have to understand that in order for them to get honor and prestige out of them conquering God's people, then the city needs to be rebuilt. So in this text right here, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore, in other words, Artaxerxes, the king, is going to write an order that says, rebuild and restore Jerusalem. When he wrote that, that's when the 2300 prophecy began. Listen to me, listen to me. Not when they got their stuff together and got the people together and began to walk there. No, it doesn't say that. It says from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem. From the time that the king says, okay, I'm writing this down, I'm making this a law, they can restore and rebuild Jerusalem. When he wrote it, that's when the count begins. Daniel 9 is explained by Ezra 7, verse 7. And there went up some of the children of Israel, and of the priests, and of the Levites, and the singers, and the porters, and the Nethinims unto Jerusalem, in the 7th year of Artaxerxes the king. Why is that important? Because in the 7th year, they could not get themselves or try to get themselves together unless there was a law or an order by the king. So when they start getting themselves together, they didn't leave yet. They just knew that there was an order in the 7th year of Artaxerxes the king. When you find out But the 7th year of Artaxerxes that's when the 2300-day prophecy began, in the 7th year. So let's look at the 7th year. So the 7th year, if you do your research, and I have a set of Christian encyclopedias, and I kept them just for that one reason, because later they'll go back and they'll change anything and everything just to make the prophecy untrue. But they cannot alter what God said is so. Artaxerxes became king in 464 BC. Whenever you're counting the BC, you count backwards. So the highest number is 464. And from 464 to 463, that's 1 year. From 463 to 462, that's 2 years. From 462 to 461, that's the 3rd year. From 461 to 460, that's the 4th year of the King Artaxerxes. And from 460 to 459, that's the 5th year. From 459 to 458, that's the 6th year. And from 458 to 457, that's the 7th year. It says in the 7th year of Artaxerxes, that's when they began to get themselves together. They didn't leave yet. They were getting themselves together. In the 7th year of Artaxerxes, now going forward. So here are some other prophecies that I want you to get. I'm gonna highlight them for you, and we'll get some time to look at it. At the beginning of thy supplications, this is in Daniel 9, the commandment came forth, and I am come to show thee, for thou art greatly beloved. Remember now, this is Daniel. And when you read all of Daniel, you have to remember that Daniel had a vision in Daniel 8, right? Daniel 8, verse 14, you read verses 1 to 13, you'll find out how the sanctuary is disrespected, and how there seems to be a religious movement to change some of the things. And Daniel is praying and asking God to help him to understand what is going on. And his prayer is the supplication. And Daniel prayed. Daniel prayed so much that Daniel got sick. Daniel prayed for so long that Daniel fell asleep, woke up and threw up on himself and went back to sleep. And then the angel was dispatched. And the angel Gabriel says this to him. If you read all of Daniel 9, you'll see that it was Gabriel. At the beginning of thy supplication, at the beginning of your prayer, Daniel, the commandment came forth, and I came to show thee that thou art greatly beloved. Therefore, understand the matter and consider the vision. So here is also part of the 2300-day prophecy. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city. And God told them they had 70 weeks to do 4 things. To finish the transgression, in other words, and make an end of sin, and to make reconciliation for iniquity. All right, to finish the transgression means to stop it. Number 2, to bring in everlasting righteousness. God has chosen the Jews to be his people. And they are the ones that were supposed to teach about righteousness. And so the first thing is they have 70 weeks to stop transgressing. Number 2, they got 70 weeks to go back to teaching everlasting righteousness. And number 3, they got 70 weeks to seal up the vision and the sum. In other words, every vision and prophecy that they're supposed to fulfill, they got 70 weeks. And number 4, within those 70 weeks, they're supposed to anoint the Most High. In other words, God's people, the Jews, had 70 weeks to accept Jesus, according to prophecy, as the anointed one of God. Did they do it? No. And so what the 2300-day prophecy does, it breaks this down so you can see all of this happening historically. And it says, know therefore and understand, right? That from the going forth of the commandment, all right? And verse 26, and after 62 weeks. Now, you know that we're not going to be able to grasp all of this one time immediately. Know therefore and understand that 62 weeks shall the Messiah be cut off. 60, well, a score is 20, right? A score is 20. 3 times 20 is 60. Write that down. You got your pencil and paper. If you don't, that's on you. Daniel 9, verse 26. And after the 62 weeks shall the Messiah be cut off. How was the Messiah cut off? How was Jesus cut off? How was Jesus' ministry ended? See, the Messiah is the promised one, the anointed one, the Messiah, the prince. All right? Let's tie it together again. Go back to Daniel 9 and verse 25. And it says, know therefore and understand from the going forth of the commandment to the building of Jerusalem unto the Messiah, the prince, shall be 7 weeks, 62 weeks. 7, what's 60? 3 times 20, that's 60. What's 7 and 60? 69. And 2 weeks is 67, right? 7 and 60 is 67. And 2 weeks is 69. Unto the Messiah, the prince, shall be 7 weeks, 62 weeks. In other words, 69 weeks. Get the picture. 70 weeks are determined upon your people. You got 70 weeks. That's what the vision that Daniel was given, that Daniel was supposed to teach, and that God's people, the Jews, Israel, is supposed to learn from that prophecy. They have 70 weeks before they are to be cut off, destroyed as God's people, no longer accepted. And within, look at my hand, 70 weeks, and within 69, here's 70, within 69, the Messiah shall come. See, this is why this prophecy is so profound, because it's detailed. The thing of it is, you have to take time to read it. So verse 26, and after 60, that's 60, and 2 weeks, shall the Messiah be cut off. How was Jesus cut off? He died. Where did he die? On the cross. So the 2300-day prophecy also tells you when the cross happened. If you know when he died, you know when he was born. This is how you know that his birth is not in December. See, rather than taking, a harsh position on it, you can have a biblical position if you study the word. Let's go a little bit further. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. How many days in a week? 7. And in the midst of the week, he shall be caused the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. What did Jesus do on the cross? Everybody know the answer. He what? He died. And when he died, what happened? The lambs that were used to prefigure him, that system ended. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. What's the covenant? Well, until the cross was erected, the only way to be saved is that you had to kill an animal according to your type of sin, whether it was a goat or a lamb or a heifer, or even the poor would bring in meal and oil mixed together. He shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. What's 1 week? That's 7 days. In the midst of the week, what's half of 7? 3.5. How long did Jesus minister on the earth? 3.5 years. And it says, in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. Well, in the middle of the 3.5 years, he died. When he died, what happened? It is finished. What is finished? No more animal sacrifices. No more confessing sins over goats. And he ended that, and the veil of the temple was rent. Now you're ready to go a little further. This is line upon line, precept upon precept. This is how you prove that one prophetic day equals one literal year. This is how you prove it. And here are two texts, because at the very least, there should be two texts that support one another, that support theology. After the number of the days in which ye searched the land, even 40 days. Were they in the wilderness for 40 days? No, they were in the wilderness for 40 years. After the number of days in which ye searched the land, even 40 days, each day for a year. In other words, one prophetic day always equal one literal year. Well, how do you know? It only is so when God says it. Whenever God gives us a prophecy in the Bible with numbers, whenever God says something that is going to happen and it has numbers, then one prophetic day always equals one literal year. After the number of days in which ye searched the land, even 40 days, each day for a year, shall ye bear your iniquity, and even 40 years, and ye shall know my breach of promise. That's Numbers 14 and verse 34. The second one is Ezekiel 4, verse 6. And when thou hast accomplished them, lie again on thy right side, and thou shalt bear the iniquity of the house of Judah 40 days. I have appointed thee each day for a year. How long did they wander in the wilderness? 40 years. The prophecy talks about 40 days, and then it explains each day for a year. And this is the guide, the instruction that the Millerites used. And so when it talks about the 2300-day prophecy, this is why I have 2300 prophetic days equals 2300 literal years. And in Daniel 9 in verse 4, it says 70 weeks are determined upon thy people. How many days in a week? 7. 7 times 70 is what? 490 days. Prophetically, 490 days equals what? 490 years. Each prophetic day for a literal year. So there are 4 phases of judgment. And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. So I want to share that with you and look at it. So now we know when the 2300-day prophecy begins. It begins in 457 BC, right? So it said 490 years, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people. Now, this is the 2300-day prophecy. So if the first part of it begins with 70 weeks are determined upon thy people, and a part of them 70 weeks, it tells you about the 62, and it breaks down when, I'm gonna show it to you in a moment, when Jesus dies on the cross, and it breaks all of that down. So we're looking to add and come to a number of 2300. So we know that 70 weeks is 490 years. So we start at 457 BC. 457 BC, and we count 490 years, and we come to a date, right? After the number of days, here's our proof, there's our evidence. I'm just putting it there again in front of you. It says, and so in 62 weeks, this is where you get your 483, all right? And know ye therefore understand from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah, the Prince, shall be 7 weeks, 7, 3 score, 60, and 2, That's 69. All right. And there went up some of the children. We got the time, we got the dates. All this information is there for review. But I want to share with you the 7 weeks, 3 score, 3 times 20, right? Is 60, and 2 is 7 plus 60 plus 2 is 69, which equals what? 483 days, right? So when we start counting the 490 years, you have to begin with what it says, 69 weeks unto the Messiah on this in the 69th week. In other words, 483 years after the prophecy began, will begin the ministry of the Messiah. The only way you're going to get it is to look at it, to know the numbers, to take time. This is just a review. Don't you know that this is a subject that takes 3 to 4 days, sometimes a week? But I want to share with you, give you an overview, because most of you should know this. And so I dare say for all of you, every one of you should just be a review. So if you go from 457 BC, what you see in red, and you count 483 years, you'll come to 27 AD. 27 AD is when you'll find that Jesus is anointed the Messiah. That's in the prophecy. It says unto 3 score, it says 60 under 62 weeks, 62 weeks, 69 weeks, and that the Messiah shall be anointed. So we know that when you count 483 years, you arrive at 27 AD, the year that Jesus becomes the Messiah. Jesus doesn't become the Messiah when he's born. Jesus becomes the Messiah when he's anointed. He's not anointed until he is baptized by John. And so you'll find in 27 AD is when he's baptized and anointed. So it says that's only 69, right? So you got one more is 70. So you got their weeks. So there's 7 days. You got 69 sets of 7. You got one more set of 7, which makes it 70. Why? Because 70 weeks are determined upon that people. So from 27 AD to the next time you'll find is 34 AD. You'll find 27 AD is the conclusion of the 69 weeks. There is only 1 week left to total 70. The last week is split in half. Why? And after 3 score 2 weeks shall the Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. He'll die on the cross, but not for himself. He shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. What many? So for and in the midst of the week, what happens? He dies in the middle of the week. So 7 weeks, 1 week is 7 days, and 7 days is 7 literal years. And half of 7 years is 3.5 months. So in the middle of the week, you'll find that Jesus dies on the cross. Jesus became the Messiah in 27 AD. From 27 to 34, that's your 7. 27 plus 7 is 34. So Jesus became the Messiah. And 34 AD, that's the end of the 70 weeks. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people. And that 34 AD, what happened? That's when they stoned Stephen. So, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week, half of 7, 3.5. 34 AD is the time when Stephen was stoned, when the sole responsibility of the gospel was removed from the Jewish nation and given to the Gentiles. This is what you must understand what happened in 34 AD. Stephen was stoned, and the end of the 70 weeks. And now the responsibility of the gospel is no longer given to the Jews. See, the Black Israelites don't know this. They don't understand the 20-day prophecy. They don't know that the responsibility of the gospel is taken from the Jews. They don't know that. But we're supposed to have been teaching it all these years. So, looking at it closer, and after 62 weeks shall the Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. He shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week. So remember, the prophecy starts in 457 BC, right? And when you start counting backwards, 457, 450, 350, 300, 200, 100, and then you get to 1 AD, 2 AD, 3 AD, 24 AD, 25, 27 AD. And that is the 70 weeks. Excuse me, that is the 69 weeks. The 70 weeks goes to 34 AD. 70 weeks are determined upon that people. Now get this, 70 weeks are determined upon that people, which is 483 years. You take away 483 from 2,300, and all you have left is 1,810 years. And that's how you get to 1844. Take time, cogitate, pray with me on this. It's clear. This is not what you should be learning. This is what you're supposed to be teaching. This is what gives us our identity. This is why we came into existence. And if you don't know it, I understand it hasn't been taught, but now you have an opportunity. So the investigative judgment begins in heaven in 1844. So going on to part 4. I told you there are 5 parts. Going on to part 4. Okay. Part 4, when we start looking at Daniel 8 and verse 14, it predicts the beginning of the investigative judgment. That's what it predicts. The beginning of the investigative judgment. Part 5 teaches about the sanctuary and Christ's ministry in the sanctuary. Well, let's look at part 4. It predicts the beginning of the investigative judgment. The cleansing of the sanctuary involves the work of the investigative judgment. Great controversy, 481. The investigative judgment is the closing work in the heavenly sanctuary. In other words, the last work that's done, that Christ does in the most holy place, is the investigative judgment. The investigative judgment takes place in the courts of heaven, and there is a specified time is fixed for the investigative judgment. We don't know what it is. Only one question will be asked during the judgment. Have they been obedient to my commandments? Everyone, they shall be judged by the law of liberty. The investigative judgment closes with the living. Every man's work will be closely previewed by God during the investigative judgment. There are 4 stages of judgment. First of all, you have to know this. The only reason why we shall be judged is because all of us have sinned, and all of us, because of that, will be judged. So there are 4 phases of judgment, and judgment only comes to those who violated the law. And anyone who ever descended through Adam is conceived in sin and shapen in iniquity. So therefore, everyone shall be receive the 4 phases or stages of judgment. 1, the judge will investigate. 2, the judgment of sentence. 3, the confirmation of judgment. And 4, judgment and its execution of the sentence. So we talked about this more than once. What are some of the things that happen before the close of probation and some of the things that happen after? Well, the investigative judgment happens before the close of probation. We have the 2,300-day prophecy. We have the 70-week prophecy, which is the investigative judgment, and 4 phases. So listen very carefully, even though it's being said different ways, it means the same thing. There'll be judgment before the 1,000 years. There'll be judgment at the second coming. There'll be judgment during the 1,000 years. there'll be judgment after the 1,000 years. And there'll be 3 books of judgment. So you have phase 1, the investigative judgment. And at the second coming, there's a separation, right? Behold, I come quickly. My Lord is with me. Let him be as filthy, be filthy still. Let him be as righteous, be righteous still. And he will separate the wheat from the tare, the sheep from the goat. That happens at the second coming. That's part of judgment. And then during the 1,000 years, there's a judgment of confirmation. And then there's the executive judgment, when you carry the sentence out. See, you can say the judgment is you're going to get 10 years in prison. But when you're thrown in the jail and the key is turned, that's the execution of the judgment. That's the executive judgment. So looking at the investigative judgment, we have to review, and I'm sure you remember that only 8 judgment began with Adam. But ultimately, God set a time for the investigative judgment. Because Adam was given probationary time, right? That's judgment. But the investigative judgment that God put on the entire planet, God set Noah before them, and God warns them, and the investigative judgment lasted 120 years. Now, you should know this. You should remember this, that Noah preached 120 years. I know that math there is wrong. Today is 2022, and I got 2021, but I got the numbers right. You take away 1844 from 2022, you have 178 years. And you take 178 and you take away 120 from those numbers there to the left just now, right? But when you look at it, you take away, here's the correct information. You take away, today is 2020. If you take away 120 years from 2020, then you'll come up with, you take away 1844 from 2022. I removed those numbers because I didn't want to confuse you as they were confusing me. Today is 2022. Investigative judgment began in 1844. Here come the Holy Ghost. He's working it out clearly in my mind now. So here, write this down. In 2022, today, the investigative judgment began in 1844. If you take away 1844 from 2022, you get 178. So that means we have been involved in the investigative judgment for 178 years. How long was the antediluvian period of investigative judgment? 120. But we are now living 178 years since the investigative judgment began. It began in 1844. So since it began in 1844, and you take 1844 from 2020, you come up with 178 years. Wow. But Noah's investigative judgment only lasts 120 years. So if you take away the 120 from 170, from 100 and 178, you'll have that we've been living in 58 years of grace. 58 years. Noah's people didn't get that 58. Their time ended at 120 years. We're living 178 years since the investigative judgment began. I'm going to say it again, just so you get it clear. Today is 2022. The investigative judgment began in 1844. If you take away 1844 from 2022, do the math. Just do the math. Write it on paper. You'll get it. Please get it. Write it down. You'll never forget it. Because today is 2022. if you take away 1844 from 2022, well, why am I doing that, sir? Because in 1844, the investigative judgment began. When you take away 1844 from 2022, you'll know how long the investigative judgment has been going on. It's been going on for 178 years. Wow. Noah's investigative judgment was just 120 years. That means God is merciful unto us. And he's given us 58 years more than he gave Noah. And in Noah's time. Listen, saints of God, I set this alarm for a reason, because I do have another appointment. And I know that I wasn't going to finish this, but I just want to highlight some things for you and come to a close and give you a chance to ask questions. And then maybe sometime by tomorrow, so I'll know whether or not your church leadership wants me to continue, and then we can continue with this last part. So Noah.
No, Pastor, you can continue. You can continue. You can continue.
I cannot continue. I have an appointment.
No, next week. Next week.
Oh, okay. Well, this is why I had to set that alarm, because this appointment.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so listen. What I want to do is just highlight. Let me just highlight an area for you. All right. You get an idea of where and how I want to book of 3 books of judgment. I mean, of course, we don't have enough time for those 3 books, but I want to just highlight this one thing for you, and I can't but emphasize this one thing, and that is how these 4 phases in the executive judgment. This is what I want to come back to next week and highlight those events. All right. Let me now know I can close here. Please, if you wish to support this ministry, let me close with this. But I'm going to stop now to take questions on what I presented and not where I'm going. So at least to give you at least 20 or 30 minutes, hopefully 20 minutes to ask questions for clarity. But if you need to have contact with me, please send your questions to the email. That's goyeministries.life. If you wish to support this ministry, I'm telling you, you do it directly. Just go to Amazon.com. You can buy 10 books. You can buy 10, buy 5. The books are, I think, $15 a piece. You buy 5, that's like $75 support. You can do that every month. You can do that every week. You can do that every paycheck. If you want to support this ministry, you see value with it. I'm telling you, what the Lord has given me is a ministry that is well prepared, that I'm about to take as he leads and guides and permits me to New York City. I invite you to look at Men Under Development. Email CEO@menunderdevelopment.org. And then lastly, I can't but emphasize this. There is an organization, a company, Deluxe Checks Exchange. All right. You sign up, you send your payments. It's that simple. You just sign up. And there are conferences in America that belongs to this. And I just got paid a few weeks ago through a conference and for doing the work like I'm doing now. And they send me a check, and the check comes through. And all you have to do is set it up. You don't need your church to do that. You do it yourself. I want to support this ministry. I want to set them up. I'm saying this is how you can give your support. If you are concerned with how much you lose, talking about conversion and taxes, if you're concerned about how much you lose, then you'll never know how much you get. So God bless you. We can pick up where we left off for next week. We can do that, but I just challenge you again, please. If we're going to go through this next week, I can't but stress it, saints of God. The things that we need to know, I've been looking on internet. I've been searching. Yes, there are 1 or 2 people that are touching on some of these subjects, but I don't find them balanced. I find them heavy on one side or not informed enough on the other. And I'm observing. And I challenge you with this to say that next week, as I I'm told that we have an opportunity, and I don't have another appointment. I'm gonna go through it from beginning to end. It's gonna take every bit of an hour and a half. You need to be on time. If you all have something else scheduled at 4 o'clock, let me know. I'll come at 5. Let the people know. But saints of God, this is what we should be teaching. Not me. You should be teaching this. Every one of you should have learned this as you become a part of the church. No, don't feel I'm pointing my finger at you, even though you see my finger. Don't feel that I'm scolding you. No, I'm not doing that. I'm telling you that if more of us would learn this, imagine how fast the impact of the three angels' messages would be. So lastly, before I take your questions or comments, if you want to support this ministry, just go to Amazon.com. Buy a book, buy 10 books, buy 5 books, buy it every week. Every time you get a paycheck,